Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they did. They absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host, and I am delighted that you're here with me this week to talk about the continuation of evils and insanities. And you know something? That's alphabetically correct. E before I. Oh, and there's some other things in there about, I don't know, how you use your vowels and all of that. But in this case, what we're seeing and what we have just exhibited this week is the epitome of that evil coming to its head, that hydra that has so many heads that are buried in what a lot of people are calling the deep state, to the extent that uh, they're just popping up all over the place. And quite frankly, because of the facts and the truth in so many different ways that are coming out, they're actually popping. Not popping enough, though. So, what we have observed this week is some more of what the Anti Federalists predicted in relationship to a people that lost their morality, lost their sense of constitutionalism because they lost the truths as to which it takes to understand and live by the Constitution. And, the Constitution isn't everything. Yes, it is in this country. It is everything, Tom. What are you talking about? Well, I think we pointed out last week that what is first and foremost is that we have to have a moral people. We have to have a people that understand the authority of the King of Kings, the authority of the Lord of Lords, the authority of one that is over all governance. And once we understand that, then we can come into, okay, what does it take to work within the context and a framework for society? And a society that not only should be the predominant population that understands all that I just mentioned, but it is for the governance of those that don't understand it, that should be the minority. Oh, we just talked about majorities and minorities. Yeah, yeah, that is true. There is that, but not by the virtue of someone's skin color, nor nationality, nor language, but true by definition of their belief system, especially that which in the context of Christianity versus all of the other so-called beliefs or religions that are out there. And we already established last week that now we have humanism and environmentalism as the God of America. And so, or the gods, I guess, even though they're kind of like one and the same, but you can distinguish them somewhat differently. Humanism, environmentalism, it's all about it's all about the environment. And don't forget that you need to go confess your sins to all those trees, plants, and whatever else it is that's out there. And that, as I told you before, if you haven't gone between last week and this week to go look it up, that is a lot of the idolatry that God judged Israel over, and he judged every nation over when you look at the course of history, especially from a biblical perspective. Well, interestingly enough, what we'll touch bases on with that little bit of an introduction, I guess that seems how my whole program is a monologue, except when I invite guests on, that would be my opening monologue, if you will, for today. I want to welcome everybody at the Liberty Works Radio Network and at Soaring Eagle and at all of those that are beginning to follow me some more at YouTube, which is really fun. I've been seeing more people clicking on to actually follow on the Samuel Adams channel on YouTube. And that's all one word, Samuel Adams Returns channel on YouTube. And you could find all of the links to the various videos in that and the podcast at samueladamsreturns.net. And the podcasts are really doing well. So thank you, all of you who take and subscribe to the podcast. I really appreciate that, especially through Blueberry and some of the other locations. So let's get to it. I think that was very interesting. We'll kind of take it in chunks here a bit. Is that when we talk about the environmentalism, we can actually look at the little girl from over in socialism land and the big stink she's making throughout our land. And that I was very delighted that President Trump ignored her and kind of walked past and said she looks like a happy girl. I think that's where everybody's slamming about his misspelling. Well, I think that's where he misspelled. It should be an unhappy girl. He missed the UN because that's where she was, so we can just add the UN to happy and make it what it is. She was a UN globalist, lying, cheating, deceiving girl. Oh, and she wasn't happy, or her happiness is in her false religion of globalism and environmentalism. So therefore, you know what? She's a UN unhappy girl. I got it right. President Trump can use that one. So can any of you others that are taking a look at that young creature of lies and deception. Yeah, I got some pretty strong language about that because what's been totally ignored in the media, totally ignored in everything, and actually has had negative responses is President Trump's speech at the UN. I don't know how many of you really have taken the time to watch it or read it. I think it's more powerful. I think it's powerful in his delivery. I didn't watch the delivery, but the commentaries I read on friendly news environments, the commentaries there were that he maintained a very, what everybody wants, a presidential demeanor. He had a demeanor that was respectful of the content of his words. You see, that's one of the very unique things about President Trump. He can take and smack the bad guys up the head and take and do a rope-a-dope when he really needs to. But when it comes to something that should have the respect, should have honor, should have that as part of the messaging, he knows how to do it. So let's kind of just look at it. I think that if you go to and just look up at the White House, you can look at the briefing statements and the remarks at the UN. That link is obviously, you can go to the archives at samueladamsreturns.net, and they're there in the archives. Several things that he does, and I'm not going to read it, I'm just going to summarize the paragraphs, is that he talks strongly again about America. He talks strongly about the fact that we now have, once again, the world's strongest military force, and we don't want to use it. But at the same time, I don't see in these words where he says that we won't use it. And he does say that this is why the United States vigorously defends the traditions and customs that made us who we are. He talks about the beloved country and what it means to be as we are with our singular potentials and strengths. He talks about the whole free world needs to embrace national foundations, that their national foundations, and not be globalists. He really calls that out. Why are you trying to be replaced by globalism? It doesn't make a lick of sense. And then as he continues to talk about it, he talks about taking pride in your own country. He talks about the times at the very beginning, he talks about, hey, there's people here that were establishing liberty, but there's a whole bunch of despots here. There's a whole bunch of very bad people, is the way I interpret what he said here at the UN. And what he says, hey, if you want to take pride in your country, if you want to take pride in that whole idea of whatever what you are, or whether you're a democracy or whether you're a republic or what, go for it. That's what you need to do. That's what you need to stay strong on, but get away from the insanities. It does not belong to the globalists. And why the United States is looking at programs of renewal internal. So we're having an internal, under President Trump, all you folks that are uh, reformed or want reform in government and everything else, you need to start with reformation in the churches. You need to reform the churches. He talks about some of the things that are happening politically, what's happening economically, what's happening socially for people, getting back to work, rebuilding, revitalizing, doing all of that. And then what he gets into is taking and trying to establish what is it with religious liberty. What is religious liberty? America is based on that. You know, that's what it really comes down to. And those are the key aspects that the UN, if you go through, and this is not tinfoil hat stuff, ladies and gentlemen. I've begun to put programs together, and then, as I always do, I go so far off track on what's happening in relationship, especially to the establishment churches, to the major denominations, and to a lot of the wacko left denominations. And as I pointed out, the universal, I call it the universal cemetery, where they're all sitting around and, you know, confessing sins to a bunch of plants in their chapel. Those folks have no true biblical context, no Reformation context of what is liberty in Christ. First of all, that gives you liberty in your life, and then that gives you liberty as an individual that comes together within society. And for a society, Christianity is the only mechanism for liberty. And as John Adams and as Madison stated, it is only this Constitution only for a moral and religious / virtuous people. You can't have virtue without religion, to some extent, people say, depending on how you look at the definition of virtue. Well, anyway, President Trump really got into this whole thing on what's going on out there, and he just went through a number of different issues with all of the different Iranians and this, that, and the other. But the real problem, as we get to the end of it all and the end of the speech, is to talk about what is it around this rhetoric of social justice. What policies are there? And he really slams back on the open border activists and the idea that their social justice policies are cruel and evil. Very interesting. And then what does that mean when you start looking at how does that impact us in relationship to our religious liberties, and what's going on with the dictators in various countries who have taken and assaulted Christians in particular, even in the Muslim nations. And he doesn't get into it, but if you look statistically on what has happened especially under the Obama administration, was the whole fact and reality that more Muslims were coming in, and they weren't the real refugees, whereas the Christians in those Muslim countries that were at war were the real refugees and needed that protection. No different than in Venezuela, no different than in Cuba, no different than in some of the other nations across the world where Christians need that place to go. And isn't it interesting, as we kind of wrap up in this last minute, that's why our founders came to America, was for Christian religious liberty. Not for Muslim, not for anything else, but for Christian religious liberty. And here in America, we have the persecution going on by the media. We have it going on inside of universities. We have it going on in local and state government. And in some respects, we have it going on in the judiciary of the federal government. So when we take a look at what President Trump had to say at the UN, it was a lot. But what we need to look at was that follow-up from last week in relationship to our religious liberties and what that means from Samuel Adams' perspective, And yes, the anti-federalists, because they did get it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they did. They absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Novolis, your host. I'm delighted to be here. Once again, I'm delighted to all the years that Liberty Works Radio Network has been keeping me on Saturdays, both at 9 a.m. and 7 p.m. Go on, check those folks out. I know you're listening here, so you already know all about it. But that's always something else that needs to be done, and that's go hit that donate button. And for those that aren't listening right at the moment, because at Soaring Eagles Radio, we kind of take out the second segment, and so they get the first and third segment. But always want to thank them for being down there in that Lima, Ohio market as well. One of the other little promotions that I'd like you to take a look at for those that are in Ohio is to take a look at nothing better, more delicious, more wonderful than pepper-licious.com. Pepperlicious.com, where you can get some wonderful specialty hot peppers, especially that Chilean ají yellow pepper. And not only that, there's some really unique jams that use those yellow hot peppers, as well as the rarest, as I call it, the chocolate habanero. Very unique. Anyway, go to pepper-licious.com for those that are in Ohio and enjoy all those goodies. So let's pick back up just for a little bit. Then President Trump, I wanted to finish this up because he really slams on here is the global bureaucrats have absolutely no business attacking the sovereignty of nations that wish to protect innocent life. Like many nations here today, we in America believe that every child, born and unborn, is a sacred gift from God. So there it goes from last week that first off, you have to understand that sanctity in life for the unborn, the born, and the aging and the dying is all owned by God. So that kind of goes to everything that I said last week too, is everything's owned by God. Everything. You, me, the whole planet. So, going in and trying to confess sins to a bunch of plants is not it. We need to confess our sins before the living God. And Jesus is the only Savior that can forgive those sins by virtue of what the Father has provided. So he talks about continuing on is that these whole international entities are trampling on the rights to self-defense, the rights to everything. This UN arms trade treaty is destructive to America. And he just goes on and hammers on the UN, which we need to. We need to have that. And the interesting pieces about what he's doing here is that he is establishing what our constitutional foundational truths are and must need be. And then how do we restrain the evils? How do we hold back these dangerous impulses, as he says? You know what? We have to be that free and independent people, but to do that, we have to be submissive, not to the government, but to the living God, and come together in society based on understanding who is sovereign and the fact that we as citizens are therefore sovereign by virtue of being given that sovereignty through that living God. And he talks about sovereignty is only secured, democracy is only sustained, greatness is only realized by the will and devotion of patriots. Well, the only thing that I always argue with anybody about is that it's our republic that is sustained. Democracy is not. But when we look at democracy at the local level, I can understand using that word from that perspective. And that we have to look at what does it mean to have a love of one's nation and be a true patriot. So going into this, he challenges the leaders of the nations there at the UN to lift up their nations, to cherish their culture, honor their history, treasure their citizens, and make their countries prosperous and righteous. Honor the dignity of their people. You know, it just gets down to um, what is it that we are going to uh, allow? I'm not going to say tolerate because tolerate has a wrong connotations anymore, and tolerance is nothing but uh, it is the overshadowing of the evils that are out there. And I just, ladies and gentlemen, it's very interesting. I think it's important that we go back and we look at that speech. We go back and look at the fact that in America right now, the hydra of globalism, the hydra of socialism, the hydra with its many heads, okay, we'll call it globalism, socialism, communism, all the isms, whether that is the fanaticism of jihadism, so on and so forth, is really rearing its multi-headed insanity. And for those of you that are at the Liberty Works Radio Network and listening to me on the radio at the moment, you have to go to YouTube to see I'm very expressive with my hands and the Hydra head, but you got to have some fun with it. You know, I have fun on this program, even though it's as serious as we can get. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of segue here to something that's constitutionalism, an action of constitutionalism, something that is within the context of Article 1, Section 2, Clause 5, Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6 and 7, Article 2, Section 4, Article 3, Section 1. And that is what we now have, the tolerance and capitulation of the established deamoncrats to the socialist, jihadist evils within the Democrat Party. And it's not just the little group of the four loud-mouthed women running around. No, it's what I talked to you about several weeks ago, if not a couple months ago. This is now as part of the Kozak Plan. And what happened in Czechoslovakia is that you have right now, and I talk about it in the book. Let me get my finger pointing properly over here, folks. I talk about it in the book, From Covenant to the Present Constitution. You have right now a significant number of communists in Congress. They are called, in the greatest portion of them, they are called what? The Congressional Progressive Caucus. By virtue of the Kozak Plan, the idea and intent, and as well as what the Muslim Brotherhood has been doing for the last, since the 90s, late 90s, and what they've been doing as well, is getting people in place not only to be elected into the national legislature. They have had people, especially under the Obama administration, have had communists, socialists, globalists, jihadists placed on the federal courts. And then the greatest number of evil, because they're against everything that deals with constitutionalism, are in the bureaucracies. They're in every department of federal, state, and large local governments. All right, I'm just going to do one slam today, maybe. And that is, this is again your fault churches, pastors, deacons, elders, teachers. It's your fault. Only because what I've been saying for years here on this program is because you got so focused on the rooftop message that you forgot that we have to live within a society, and in this constitutional republic, we must have a moral and virtuous slash religious people. Or you can say by Madison's part, religious first and then John Adams, virtuous. So the point is we don't have that moral, religious, virtuous people that understand the foundational Reformation truths to stand against tyranny and despotism as our founding fathers and those pastors from the pulpits at that time. Okay, that's it. I'll back off a little bit. So with that point, the gaps had to be filled. The bureaucrats grew their entities. The leftist politicians got elected and grew the fact that we have bureaucracies that are not constitutionally sound. But because the church was not fulfilling its duty within society, within the local government and the state governments, because that's where it really started and why the appeal was made to the higher authority being the federal government, was because we didn't have the people fill in the gaps within local government, the local school boards, the state school boards, the county commissioners, the elected in the state, and then those that were elected and are elected nationally. We, as Christians, lied and got lied to on there is no separation between church morality, religion, and virtue and state. Because if Madison and Sam Adams were saying, not Sam, but John, Sam Adams said a whole lot more that was even more captivating that I'm not going to get into. But just alone staying on Madison and John Adams, because they're the big knowns, is that without that, this Constitution cannot be executed appropriately. And that includes the state constitutions. So when the church went to the rooftop, it created a vacuum. When Christians and pastors went to the rooftops, it created a vacuum. Humanism, socialism, communism, jihadism, every one of the isms, and now that other religion, environmentalism, have filled the gap. That's why you have, the little UN happy girl from Europe running around and doing what she's doing. Remember, that means she's the unhappy girl. She's the UN happy girl. So she's happy about the UN. Anyway, as we get down to this last minute in this segment, I wanted to give you a couple other action items. Is that here is a whole chapter in the Founders Constitution. I will put the references to the pages for you, and they are already in the archive. I know you're not going to go read them. I know that. So coming up here in the next segment, I'm going to talk through a little bit about this, because now that we have this evil of impeachment by poor Nancy capitulating to the evil of the progressives. And she was in that progressive caucus for a while, but she got out so she could become speaker and keep that hidden. So don't kid yourself about Nancy Pelosi. She is a communist that hates America. But Sam Adams loved America, and so do you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to this program. So come on back in the third segment as we take a look at the Founders' Constitution in relationship to impeachment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists got it right. And welcome back to all those at Soaring Eagle Radio. Appreciate being here. And thanks, Dr. Mike and Kathy, for having me on the network. And I hope you all are enjoying it. We had taken a walk through in the last segment a number of different things. We even talked about the UN Happy Girl a little bit. We're going to talk about her just a moment more as we have now and prepared to go into the idea of this whole evil that we have with Nancy Progressive Communist Pelosi, because as I mentioned at the close of the last segment, Nancy Pelosi used to be a member of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, but she exited that so she could become Speaker of the House. So each time she becomes Speaker of the House, she leaves that caucus, which Nadler is virtually a card-carrying communist. So all these people, Adam Schiff for brains, I said that correctly, shift. Okay, you have to see I'm shifting, and I know it's on the right. It's on the column on the right-hand side of the steering wheel. That shifter. Oh, a lot of young people won't understand that one. But anyway, these people use the lies exactly of the Kozak Plan to talk about patriotism, democracy, and unconstitutionalism of President Trump because their frame of reference is to the Communist Manifesto. The communist, I don't care, pick your communist country, their constitutions, the globalist ideas, and they're God haters. They hate our Constitution. They hate you. They hate me. And so they will use a language that sounds so nice, and as you hear from every other pundit out there, it's enhanced by the media, such that, yes, you think it's true. Well, you listening to this program don't think it's true. But anyway, let's get to some of the meat here. And I got to tell you, there's so much here, I just can't cover it all. So we've got Nancy Dancy, being led by, I think Nancy's got a collar on. She's got this collar of the communists, the jihadists, and the communists, the four wackos, as I call them, because I can't think of anything else. I don't know. What does Trump call them? The squad. He calls them the squad. Yeah, they're like the firing squad. So I think that's what they did. They held a gun to Nancy's head somehow of her fears of losing power and got her to, with Jerry Nadler, that larger communist, and all of the others. Remember, there's over 100. I think it was in one of the programs back that I talked about the Progressive Caucus. I think it was at least 90 some, around 100 plus members, and Bernie the Journey right there being one of the senators. The other ones don't want to identify themselves in that, even though they are. But the fact of the matter is that what we have is this impeachment insanity is now there because of all of that. Well, the Founders' Constitution picks up on page 148, and as we go through the impeachment clauses and all that it has to say about that, I have to flip through a few pages here because this is a small book, as you well know. So that takes us from page 148 to page 181 out of you do the math, this is 671 pages. So 671 pages, and you go from 148 to 181, that's almost what? um, 40 pages almost. Wow, 38 pages. That is a lot to say about impeachment. So I'm going to give you the long and the short of it. I think there's somebody else out there that has probably done a better article than I'm ever going to do, and you might want to check out on the Federalist. I think it's .com when you get some time. I'm sure they're going to have something about the impeachment process very, very shortly. I really like the work that they do. What I want you to understand and consider. So the Congressional Progressive Caucus et al. Is going to do this fake investigation. They're going to come up with these um, slanderous charges. They're going to put all of this other garbage, fake trash around it for justifying impeachment. And quite frankly, they don't give a damn. I don't care, you know, I'm not going to pull my punch on that one. They don't care whatsoever, and they are damnable for it. Because once again, I will reference back to the Old Testament any day of the week, and there is not one of those people that do not represent the evil leaders in Israel in one nature or another that ultimately brings judgment on themselves and on their nation. Fortunately, we do have someone in the presidency that is trying to preserve our constitutional republic, and they hate that. So they are going to devise every mechanism they possibly can to bring forward the articles of impeachment. Okay, fine. As an author earlier that Kathy talked about, fine. I really don't have a problem with that, because I really do, because I think that's just the epitome of evil. So I hope it bites them in the butt when it comes to the election, but more so as they bring that forward, and that's what the House can do. But that doesn't get rid of the president. Remember the process. And the process is such that the process has to go that the articles of impeachment may be drawn by the House of Representatives, which they have the right to do. And then it has to go to the Senate to try it. So Article 1, Section 3, Clause 6 and 7 say the Senate shall have the sole power to try all impeachments. When sitting for that purpose, they shall be on oath or affirmation. When the President of the United States is tried, the Chief Justice shall preside, and no person shall be convicted without the concurrence of 2/3 of the members present. So it's going to be interesting. I think that if there is any one senator that will go with the demons, I would give it to Mittens, because Mittens. Oh, if you don't know who Mittens is, that's Mitt Romney. Mittens is a sleazeball. For someone who claims to be, and again, not being judgmental, but looking at the fruits, to allow what happened in Massachusetts, and then to go ahead and carpetbag his way over there to Utah. And I have a lot of friends in the political stuff in Utah. And I'll tell you, Mittens bought his way into that. So Mittens is definitely a Trump hater. He's just one of the ones. And there's a couple other Republican senators that are Trump haters. But, are you going to get the 2/3 vote there to impeach him? Don't know. But I think the important part, and as you read through this process and you read through all of these different aspects, from jurisdiction to parliamentary law. Jefferson talks about the Manual of Parliamentary Practice and Rules of the House of Representatives. He goes through all of that, what that has to happen, and what those processes and procedures need to be. Then there are a number of people that looked at from the Delaware Constitution, Virginia Constitution, New York Constitution, Vermont Constitution, and the big one is records of the Federal Convention relative to impeachment and what that means in the arguments between uh, Dickinson, Madison, Wilson, Davy, and others. It's quite extensive. That takes up let's see, one, two, three, 4 pages alone, right there. And I'm not going to get into the summation of it. And then you have Luther Martin, who talks about it in 1788 in a genuine information, a letter that he wrote. Alexander Hamilton in Federalist 65. Uh, and once again, you just look at all of what he had to say relative to that. Hamilton again in 66, not in a year, but in Federalist 66. Brutus, who is my friend from New York, he talks about it in Brutus number 15, that what that means and how that works on the president. Native of Virginia and the observations upon the proposed plan of the federal government in 1778 in what he wrote, the debate of North Carolina, which is long again. Wow, that's like lots of pages on that one. James Wilson in Legislative Department Lecture on Law, 1791. Luther Martin, Impeachment, Trial of Justice Samuel Chase in the Senate, and how that went, and on and on. In this, and is brought out by the likes of Rudy Giuliani, and is brought out in some other articles of others. I'll put it to you simply. What do we got? 5 minutes, Kath? A little over 3 minutes. Okay. Simple. Bring it on in the Senate, because then the president's attorneys can subpoena every and anyone and bring them under oath to testify, give statements. So, it may be interesting to see how um, does the deamoncrats, including hillbillies, Clintons, I'm putting that as a plural, and all of the other criminals, including Obama. And if you want it, we didn't go after impeachment of Obama, but Obama, there is actual instances of what he did with his pen and phone that were impeachable, but the Republicans didn't have the intestinal fortitude to do anything about it, the cowards, especially because that little putrid person from Wisconsin was the major globalist coward that was their speaker. So the point is that it'll be interesting. Will it be a circus? Will it be a zoo? Will there be a lot of yelling and screaming? Yeah, yeah. I expect if it goes to trial, and remember what the first portion of that article says, if they take up the articles of impeachment, if they go into session specifically for that, then they have to go under a special oath, and they're oath breakers for the majority already. So what does that mean? And then we already suspect that the Chief Justice Roberts was compromised, but maybe not now that Epstein's dead, but somebody else is holding that folder with pictures and other stuff, I'm sure. But, I think it would be interesting to bring on, what was that song by that one singer back in the early 70s, mid 70s? Where Are the Clowns? Well, I'll tell you where they're going to be. The clowns will be in the Senate chambers when the president's lawyers calls them to testify. When they are deposed, then we will see the clowns, but it won't be humorous, because we will see then the insidiousness of all of the other departments, what some are calling the deep state, that I've been talking about for these last numbers of years, that I talk about in the book. and that Sam Adams and those anti-federalists warned about in their writings. Get yourself informed. Your action item is to read the material and come on back next week because, yep, those anti-federalists got it right.